Welcome to Mixed Extents. My name is Mark Wilkinson. With me, as always, are Andrew Prusky and Anthony Nocentino. How's it going, guys?
Excellent.
Morning,
How you doing?
afternoon.
Today, we're going to be talking about patching and maintenance, and we have two very special guests. We have Aaron Bertrand and Andy Mallon. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Aaron?
So my name is Aaron Bertrand. I'm a longtime SQL Server MVP, and I am a staff database reliability engineer at Stack Overflow.
And what about you, Andy?
My name is Andy Mallon. My pronouns are he, him. I am also a staff database reliability engineer at Stack Overflow, and I'm Boston based. So enjoying the chilly, cold winters that we're almost having this year.
Oh, we're getting a lot of it for you here. It has been very cold in North Carolina for some reason.
Yeah, the rest of the country's got more winter than we have, I think.
Wasn't there like 2 feet of snow like a week and a half ago?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's all
week doesn't
gone.
count.
It's all gone.
It's raining and melting right now, but it's like 40 degrees and rainy. It's beautiful.
All right, so on to the topic at hand. And this topic came up because I get super frustrated with patching and maintenance, even though Andrew does most of it. Andrew and I work together. But it's still a really frustrating. It's just frustrating, and it hasn't really improved since I've started in my career as a DBA. So the question to kick this conversation off: why is it so hard to automate SQL patching, and what do you think is needed to make it better? And that's open for anybody.
I would say that the biggest challenge for most people is the two biggest challenges. So I'm going to answer a different question. The two biggest challenges are the like the applications and all of the other people that you need to get on board with it, with those changes, and the downtime associated with it, which are kind of like they're kind of interrelated sometimes. Sometimes it's the same thing. And coordinating the failover and the impact to the applications and all that stuff, it makes it kind of a mess.
So I think there are some additional challenges. One is that everybody thinks their app is special and can't have any downtime at all. Can't have a second of downtime. It's not possible. And yet the budget behind the people that are saying those things aren't willing to build a true HA scenario. So people are still scared to use availability groups, and they're using other methods for protecting their data. And availability groups make this part a lot smoother, but people aren't doing it. People are maybe not afraid of availability groups, but I find that they're not used in all the places where they should be. And so you have these special snowflake apps that can't have any downtime, but they're not building systems that allow you to have downtime. And then there's also another challenge, and that is that service packs and cumulative updates do not have a great track record. And so people they're wary of any new service pack, or only cumulative updates now, but they're wary of any new update that comes out. Is this going to hose my server? Is it going to cause some problem that they haven't tested well enough? And have they really tested this at my scale, because my scale is special, and all of that. So that comes into play too, I think.
CUs were a lot better with 2019 though, right? I'm just kidding.
No.
Does anyone have a count handy of how many CUs they've had to pull in the last 2 years?
Right. It's not a high number, but there are a lot of CUs that didn't get pulled but have a special note on the CU page, or a caveat, or a warning about something that you need to do.
Oh yeah, this one will break SQL Server Agent. Oh, thanks.
Right. Yeah.
Pulling just one CU every couple of years is enough to keep it fresh in people's mind, though. So even if they've got 4 versions in current maintenance that they're releasing CUs for, and they're doing them every month or every other month, if just one of those CUs every year or two has to get pulled after it's released, it really hurts confidence in installing them.
Yes. So I'm going to follow up. I kind of have two questions around that same idea. Do you test what's the level of testing that you do when you patch? Do you go to the application owners and say, hey, we're moving CU X to Y, and do you want to test your applications? Because you have the balance of functionality and security too, right? And you have to kind of take that into account when you're scheduling these things. And like from my consulting background, it really is a organizational decision, right? Some orgs I worked in just patched everything all the time and just dealt with the pain if there was regressions, and some folks tiptoed through patch levels. And so because you were all operational DBAs, what's your thoughts around that?
The ideal answer and the practical realistic answer are sometimes different, because I've worked a bunch of places, and the number of places that are actually capable of doing like full regression testing is pretty slim, especially when it comes to the database's functionality. So if you don't have comprehensive regression testing, you're not testing it anyway. Like, you're testing parts of it. In which case, what's that, Aaron?
You can't test it all. You can't.
Right.
So practically speaking, if you have a development cycle with a development environment where you're doing the most comprehensive testing you're going to get out of that development cycle, then getting the CU into that environment for a full sprint is probably the best that most people are going to get. That's going to get the most eyes on features to have it in the development environment for that one sprint or two sprints, whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever
Ideally, you'd be two or three sprints, right, to let it bake in a little bit.
But getting it at least one sprint in the development environment means that that's probably the best testing you're going to get, or keeping the development environment fully up to date, and then being really aggressive in patching in your dev environment, and then picking a point where you're going to move those to production.
Yeah. On the other hand, like, I don't feel like a lot of the CU fixes that come out now, maybe this was different when they were rushing CUs out between service packs, but now I feel like most of the CUs aren't going to change application behavior unless you want it to, right? Like they add a knob for something that lets you change a setting, and you can take advantage of that, but it doesn't change the behavior by default. So I feel like the level of testing you have to go through in your application to make sure that this CU is safe, it has shrunk over time, and it's much more weighted towards upgrading a major version or changing the compatibility level. Those are the things that are going to make much bigger differences that require a lot more testing than the CUs. The CUs, it's when they break something. It's not that they break something in your application, it's they break something in SQL Server or make something, cause sudden stack dumps and things like that didn't happen before. That's the risk.
The other really underrated thing in deciding how and when to release notes and what kind of testing to do is reading the release notes. I know that's not popular, and I know they kind of suck, but like, if you see that there's a bunch of fixes for availability groups, then you know that like
that's where you need to focus your testing.
Yeah, try a failover in before it gets to production and make sure, or like look at the logs and see if you're actually getting an error before you install the patch. I don't understand half of the release notes sometimes, but there are ones that'll stand out to you, and that's what you're looking for, is the release note that stands out. That's like, oh, we depend on that feature heavily. We probably need this fix because if we're not running into this problem yet, we might run into it in the future.
Yeah, I found that multiple times there have been, like, the thing that I'm testing is just validating that the fix they said they fixed is actually fixed. And so that's a happier kind of testing, right? Like, you just make sure, oh, this error message doesn't happen anymore. Or when they introduced the string or binary data would be truncated, they added that extra text to the message, like testing and making sure, yes, now I can actually tell what column was truncated and what value caused it to truncate. The thing about the release notes is they seem to be going in the direction of one sentence this is the description of the problem, and we fixed it, and that's it. And there's no, like half the time there isn't even a KB article dedicated to that fix. So you're just relying on the text in the KB in the CU article itself that just has a sentence that says, oh, blah, 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 and we fixed it. And that's not necessarily enough for me to be able to even test that. How can I even test? Like, I don't know what the scenario is that got to a place where it's, you know, the nth CU of 2019 and they found this issue and fixed it. How am I able to determine whether I'm going to hit that issue tomorrow, and if I need that CU to prevent me from hitting that issue tomorrow? It's really hard to do that from a single sentence.
Well, and we've had fixes released for bugs that we've reported, and when we find the line item in the release notes for the thing that fixes our bug, like if I didn't know what the bug was, I would have no idea what.
Right, you can't correlate the text they use in the message
like,
to the
this
problem
doesn't
you
even
actually
sound
have.
like our issue.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's where we've been at, as you were saying, Aaron, is we know there's a bug there, we apply the patch, and our testing is that bug still there or not? And that's pretty much where we're at. Apply, brilliant. Check errors, no, great, let's roll it out. And that's pretty much what we're at. Or also checking things like the application log, system log, make sure there's nothing horrendous sticking in there, just to go, okay, we're all right, roll through with the CU.
The one thing that sticks in my mind about things that were fixed, and there are lots of edge cases, is inlining scalar UDFs. So they introduced this feature, hey, this is cool, we can inline scalar UDFs now, and there was a problem. So in the first CU, they fixed that problem, and then it's like whack-a-mole, like they introduced a different problem, or there was a problem all along that they didn't discover until CU2. And so I think there were 4 or 5 CUs in a row that had the same KB text that said, fix the problem with scalar inline, scalar UDF inlining, and that's it. So I don't know how to test that. So sometimes the descriptions are so vague, and they have so many iterations of fixing the same thing multiple times in multiple CUs, and that not only makes it hard for me to test, but it's also a confidence thing. So
we might need to take this episode and send it to the program managers. Like, hey,
oh,
watch this episode.
I don't know. I think I'm already in trouble for what I said. So. I'm nervous that it's almost renewal time.
And to answer,
you're going to publish this like March 2nd, right? Or something, the day after they make all the decisions.
To answer your question too, Anthony, as far as testing things, we tend to install newer stuff, in our lower environments and let it bake for quite a while before we push it up to any further environments. Like right now, we primarily run 2017, but we've got a 2019 box. We've got a SQL on Linux box in our lower environments. We've got a 2022 box in our lower environments. Mm-hmm. So we tend to let it run for a while. Our first concern is, are our maintenance tasks going to break? Because there's actually features of 2022 that do break our maintenance tasks.
You do maintenance tasks?
What's that?
You do maintenance?
Sometimes.
I have a whole lot of index rebuilds every day.
That's the second part of the conversation.
But the other challenge too is it's not always possible to test a specific scenario in a dev environment or a QA environment. Like sometimes you don't have the space to create the same amount of data, or you don't have the ability to generate the same chaotic workload that happens in production when you have those pinches that you're hoping to address. So it can be, it's easy to say, oh, we'll just create a dev environment that's identical to production, but most people can't do that. Right?
Well,
like at Stack Overflow, with other things we can't test except in production. Changes
that Linux box in our dev environment gets a bit of abuse because this new CU comes out for 2019. I just install it, and then we've got a specific error, and just install the new CU, check, oh no, the error's still there, wait for the next one. So if that thing keels over, we don't really mind. So that really is our hotbed of test in there. Really stringent methods. Install it, see what happens.
And a really nice thing about containers too, that I've been taking advantage of is, okay, that didn't work, tear it down, build it again. And it's a 2-minute task, right? It's not the same the way that it used to be, where we would have to set up a whole instance and an operating system and the whole 9 yards. And,
Oh, having to install in a new VM for every CTP release and things like that.
Yes,
Yep, gone.
yes.
Those days are gone.
Yeah,
Thankfully.
containers are very nice. for
Yeah,
that
I
kind of
have
thing.
gotten into the habit of using containers for repros for issues that we run into. It's nice to get something really small and self-contained that I can even then pass off to somebody else in the community to test out to make sure I'm not doing something stupid. But
Well, that leads me to a follow-up question in the testing scenario. Do you pin a particular version or each version of SQL Server, say like 2014, 16, 17, whatever, to a particular CU within that version? Or do you kind of treat your instances individually and push them forward based on maybe like a fix that you need?
Within a major version, my goal is to always be on a CU that is recent, not not the latest, but and maybe not even everything entirely the same, because patch schedules in a large environment, especially like it's if you've got hundreds of servers, getting them all patched quickly,
Yeah, it takes months. It can take months.
yeah, it can
And so-
take a long time.
Yeah.
But
by the time
if I'm like, my goal would be to be on something in the last 6 months, picking something somewhat arbitrary, so that everything, when things get beyond that window, that they're the highest priority to patch. So it might not be specifically within the same exact CU for the entire environment, but there's a limited number of them that are out there, because it's too hard to we were just talking about how hard it is to identify whether a fix is related to a specific problem that you're seeing, and it's too hard to tell the difference if like server A is having a problem and server B is not. Too hard to know if that's because you're on a CU that's 9 months old versus 4 months old, and it just makes supporting them super complicated when you've got 1,000 different CU versions out there.
Yeah. And I mean, ideally, you want your entire environment to be the same, right? So that if you have a problem on one server, you know that it's also and it's been fixed by a certain CU, you know you're not going to have that problem on another server. But the reality is, by the time you roll, depending on the size of your environment, by the time you roll that new CU out to all of the servers, you've already got a new CU that has been tested and baked in dev, and you're ready to start rolling that out. So you have this constant cycle of shifting those. Thankfully, at Stack Overflow, we don't have the same number of servers that we had at our previous the previous place we worked, that had literally hundreds of SQL Server instances, and the sprawl there made it really hard to have everything consistent. I feel like I made some dents in their process there that convinced them that they don't have to limit their patching to 2 servers a week, and they could do it a lot faster than that. And I patched the entire dev environment in a weekend, and people were like, they had the jaw drop, like, how did you do that? And I just said, I didn't have this rigid process around, that I could only have so many hands on keyboard doing things, and I just ran through it and did them all, instead of having this big scaffolding of tasks around each update.
that actually leads to another question. What kind of tools or methods, I guess, do you use to make it so that you could in that scenario, so you could upgrade all of dev in a weekend as opposed to the usual process?
Well, for me, I mean, I did that manually because I feel like a lot of the tools that are trying to help you can often get in your way. We've used Puppet for maintaining certain things, and sometimes that can cause problems, and different types of orchestrator tools that, to get it to a point where you've configured it in a way that you can trust it, it is probably a lot of work and can kind of be self-defeating.
I would say, though, that the tool that you made use of in that scenario, Aaron, is SLAs in the dev environment. Like, that dev environment had the freedom to take servers offline on the weekend for periods of time to do patching. Like, it was baked into the weekend SLA, the dev environment does not need to be up 24/7. So that gives you a time period on the window where you can just hammer away and the entire dev environment can be offline while you're patching everything in parallel. So that related to the largest problem that we have that I mentioned at the start, coordinating with dev teams and application owners. You have a weekend downtime for dev, use it. Take the damn dev environment down and do all your reboots, do all your restarts, do all your installs, and don't worry about impacting applications.
That's part of the trade-off too, right? Because in the dev environment, we didn't have AGs. If there were AGs in the dev environment, it wouldn't have been an issue because we wouldn't need an SLA because we wouldn't need downtime. But because the dev environment didn't really mimic production because they were all standalone instances, I think, except for one, you couldn't patch without a little bit of downtime. So
AGs are my favorite tool for patching production and for patching because you patch the secondary nodes, and then the only thing that you have for downtime is your failover. And because failover is pretty quick, and depending on your SLA and your failover performance both, I guess, if it's 30 seconds to fail over, you might be able to do that any day of the week and cause a minor blip and no one cares. So you do your failover at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday and nobody even notices. And if you've got a 5-minute failover, getting 5 minutes of downtime to do that failover once a month, once a quarter, however often you're patching, when that failover is the only thing you're doing during your downtime window, that's easy to negotiate with all your other stakeholders.
So
yeah, a slight correction though. Sometimes a failover is like 30 seconds to 5 minutes.
Right.
What happens when you have 400 databases in an availability group, Andy?
I have coffee in this mug, Aaron. I'm gonna have to go add some bourbon if we're gonna talk about that AG failover bug that we're hitting at Stack Overflow.
Well, that's what I want to kind of focus on. I think actually have this as one of the questions on our list is how do yes, it's 30 seconds most of the time. So what kind of, are there any checks or boundaries or techniques that you've done to make sure that you have a consistent failover time each time? Because, all of us have supported production AGs and yeah.
This is what I wanted to get into, because from my perspective, patching a single instance is great for me. I patch it, I bounce it, it's fine. That's bad for the business because it's extended downtime. But AGs are good for the business because it's a short failover after I patch the secondary, and then I can go and check that all the databases are synced. I can patch the old primary, bounce that, and fail it over. Great for the business. It's kind of time consuming for me. Times that by 200 AGs, and I'm sitting there for an extended period of time going through, okay, patching's okay, but then you have to check everything's synced, everything's okay, nothing to come up weirdly and suspect when you bounce the thing, then you can fail it back and you're all sorted. So that's the time consuming process for availability groups. And, I was going to ask how you, because last time I did my patching, I was checking that manually. I was patching automatically using a PowerShell script that we have, but checking those AGs for me was a manual process, albeit just a script going, oh yeah, everything's synced, but I had to eyeball everything. Just wondering if you have anything that's automated to double check that for you.
So the checks, it's kind of hard to automate that because you want to know, right? You don't want to rely on some script to say, oh yeah, everything's fine, and maybe there's a bug in the script or whatever. But as far as the amount of time you're waiting, so a couple of the things that I think Andy will agree with me that we always do is checkpoint all the databases before you fail over. And we enabled indirect checkpoints on all of our servers because I feel like you just have a much more reliable impact to how often those checkpoints are happening, and you don't have some database that's coming up on the other side that has to replay way too many transactions or undo whatever, all of these phases that have to happen.
Oh, there's always one that sits there not synchronizing. There's always one.
Always, yep. And accelerated database recovery.
I literally have your indirect checkpoints blog post open in a tab because I just haven't read it yet. It's like right here, right now.
That will drop that for everyone listening. We'll drop that into any blog post that we mention. Will drop into the show notes so everyone will have access to them.
Yeah. Okay. So my biggest disappointment at Stack Overflow so far has been the fact that setting I thought was going to be a magic bullet to fix our 30-minute failover issue that we're having on this big AG, and it didn't do anything. It caused a bunch of other benefits, like all of our full backup and log backup times went down. If you see at the bottom of that post, there's a graphic of all the things that have been improved, but then the bottom line is like, wah, wah, didn't fix this 30-minute problem, this 30-minute failover problem. And Microsoft's only answer so far has been, don't have 400 databases in the AG.
Yeah, we've experienced, we had a few servers with ranging from between 300 to just over 500 databases in AG, and just the fear of failing those things over, even with the checkpoints. So I've seen
Nobody
it.
wanted to do maintenance on
They-
those boxes.
Yeah, but
They
don't let us
started
do
thinking,
it.
oh,
Right?
yeah.
Don't let us do it. Like in managed instance, you can't put more than 100 databases in
Yeah.
the AG. So like, don't let me do it on-prem either.
I remember the failover, it was all looking fine, and then the whole AG goes into resolving for some reason, and it just sits there chugging through. You're going, okay, this is good. Please come back.
Yeah, and it's not like you can have all of them being worked on at the same time to try to speed that up, right? It can only process so many databases at once, so everybody's just sitting there waiting. So.
But that's how we fixed it, was reduce the number of databases in AG. That's the only thing we could do.
So that's complicated for us. That it is not as easy as just taking a database out of one AG and putting it in another, because there's almost all of the database logic is in the application code. And so there are a lot of assumptions in there about where things live and what part of thing we're in and what the connection string is and all of that. So it's impactful.
I think it was a several month process for us.
Yeah.
It was not as simple as
sounds
Andrew
fair.
may have just made it sound.
Going back to the question Andrew asked about like, how do you tell if stuff is in sync or not? We have on all of our servers, we have my DBA database, which is open source, am2.co/dbadb will get you there. And in that database, there's a check AG latency stored procedure. So I will, after failover, I'll execute check AG latency with some parameters for the sync threshold, and that'll give back everything that is within reason of being in sync. And then you know that it's healthy to do that failover. But we also tend to separate patching the secondaries and patching and the failover and patching the now prior primary. Usually day before, do the failover, and then do the other node the day after. So by moving them into separate phases, it makes the actual, like, is it caught up, so that I can fail over less urgent. You can do patch your secondary, and then you've got like all day to make sure, well, until your transaction log fills up, to make sure that it's actually syncing properly, so that it's less of a rush. Presumably you don't, you've got a little bit of threshold on your transaction logs before they fill up, but you get your server rebooted, check, and then you can see that stuff is actually healthy and syncing.
Yeah, that's what we did over the last. I think the last time we did the patch, and I did it over 3 days. And yeah, let's do the secondaries, fail over, do the primaries, fail back. It's just if you think about the amount of CUs, it's monthly, so I don't want to spend 3 days every month.
Right.
Yeah, we have limited people on the team. One tool, and I don't want to make this sound like some sort of like tech management podcast or something, but communication and relationship building. And I'll tell you why. We worked with we have a central, mostly central location where all data access happens. Pretty much every app uses the same data access layer to communicate with our servers. Because of that architecture, and because my team has a really good relationship with all the other engineering teams, including the team that manages that layer, we were able to work with them to. They created error handling such that if a certain error certain list of error codes come up that are related to AG failovers, it will pause for a second and retry pause for a second and retry until it goes through for a certain amount of time. Eventually it'll fail. But that change alone has made it so that we don't even really have to think about doing failovers in the middle of the day as far as, generating errors for the application, because it's already built into the application logic that if it sees any of these errors related to AG failovers, it'll just automatically retry instead of throwing an error back to the application.
Yeah, it's nice. It does mean that we don't have to schedule, say, patching weekends where we come in, we can do it pretty much. I mean, and we're staggered as well. So I'm based in Ireland, Mark's based over in the States. So when I'm doing work, like it's early in the morning for them. So like our development environments, I can just say when I come in, it's 4 o'clock in the morning for them. Right, I'm patching all the dev environments off I go. And usually I'm done by the time all the devs come online in the States. I say that usually. There have been instances where people have come in and gone, what's going on? And I've gone, yeah, about that. Give me an hour.
So is it time? Is it time to get into your worst patching experience?
I think Andy has the most interesting PTSD here.
Yeah. So I was just lamenting that I didn't put any bourbon in my coffee. So the very first DBA job I had, where I was like officially a DBA and I was the junior DBA on the team, we had our environment was like a few hundred clusters with 3 FCIs on each of these 4 node clusters, supporting a hosting environment for our product. And there were 3 DBAs, and we did all of our patching manually. So we did something close to what Andrew mentioned, where we would have like a patching week, and we'd all work really terrible hours. And like at night, we'd have servers that were going to be patched that night. And we had our customer downtime cleared, and we would divide them up so that we would each do individual clusters, and we owned all of the failovers and all of the setting changes and stuff. And one of the guys, who is supposedly the more senior person, failed over all the FCIs onto 1 node and was patching the other 3. And they all started paging to disk because he hadn't changed max server memory, and they were configured to use 80% of any individual node's memory. And one of the instances failed over in the middle of patching when the other 3 nodes were in a shitty state. And the patch failed to install, and it was partially installed, and it wouldn't uninstall. And he just disappeared.
I've heard too many stories like that with the magician that disappears in the middle.
Yes. So me and the other guy are patching our servers, and we're checking in on whatever chat app we were using at the time. And we're like, hey, where's other guy? Where'd he go? What's going on? We're still getting alerts for the server. Are you troubleshooting it? What's going on? And by the time we finished and we still hadn't heard from him, we realized that he had just disappeared partway through patching, and master was corrupt, and that instance wouldn't start. And we ended up having to like restore master from, it was the night that I learned how to restore master from a backup, actually. But we had to restore master and uninstall SQL Server because the instance was just like partially patched and totally hosed. The binaries in master had come out of sync, and it was a mess. I think it was 2008 R2 at the time, but it was a total mess. Now I hate FCIs because they're so fiddly to patch. This important step he had skipped was turning off automatic failover for the to the node. So if you're still using FCIs, you should take the node that you're patching out of the automatic failover list. I don't remember the setting anymore because I haven't used an FCI in quite a while, but yeah, don't let it fail over to the node that you're patching. You could get totally hosed. Yeah, and so we ended up having to finish that and we were at the end of our maintenance window, and the 2 of us that were left that were troubleshooting, trying to figure out what had happened and what he had done and where he had gone, ended up spending like 3 hours trying to repair this instance in the middle of the night.
So just totally gone. Like the person never showed up again.
He came back like the next day, like nothing had happened, and we were like, dude,
Maybe he got his memory wiped. You know, someone wiped his memory and forgot the whole thing.
Somehow he still had a job the next day, and like I don't think he even really got in trouble. And
Wow.
he was still there when I left the company later that year, I think. But it was yeah.
Maybe he had compromising photos of someone. And, you know, in the executive.
I don't know what the deal was, but as the junior DBA, having to mop up the mess of the senior DBA, and then that was when I realized that I should not be the junior DBA anymore, and I was ready for a promotion.
My biggest. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I think those kind of stories is what it takes, right? That's when you kind of graduate.
And it was early career too. It was because it was probably like 2011 maybe that I was doing that. So it was a moment where I was like, wait, if I know how to struggle through and fix this, and this other guy bailed because it was too hard, like what's happening here, man?
Whole mentality to just bail though. Oh, this service hose, I'm gonna go home.
Meanwhile, it's 2:30 in the morning, and I'm sitting on my couch because I didn't even have a decent home office to work from at the time, and he's just like gone.
Well, you were like 18, so.
Well, I was older than 18. Just because I dropped out of college to work with databases doesn't mean that I was permanently 18 until I became a DBA, Aaron.
It's not what I heard, but anyway. My biggest horror stories are all kind of similarly themed, and they aren't because of any fault of people that I work with. It's this MSDD 110_upgrade.SQL. That is the bane of my patching career.
Speaking of release notes that reappear every couple of CUs and all look identical.
That script just has like so much baggage from 2000. It's ridiculous. If you open that, if you track that script down while you're performing an upgrade and you look at what that thing is trying to execute, it's just like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like seeing the first code you ever wrote and wondering what the hell you were thinking when you wrote it and why and how it ever worked. And that's like, I look over that script and I've complained about it on the MVPDL. I filed issues on Connect and then user voice, but I haven't tried it on the new one because I think by the time I get around to writing something up, there'll be another new one. And it's not, I mean, it's never been addressed. Like the fixes that I think they should make to that script, they're still there. So it's kind of it's a perennial worrisome point for me. Is MSDB 110_upgrade.SQL going to corrupt my master database and make me restart in, you know, whatever that mode, I forget what the argument is, but you can restart in a mode where it will suspend the upgrade. And that actually made me have to rebuild 2 instances in dev in that weekend that we were talking about earlier, where I patched all of dev. It actually corrupted 2 masters and I had to rebuild. So
patched all of dev and repaired 2 corrupt instances in one weekend
by hand.
Yes.
I think my worst experience is related to the same type of bug you guys are experiencing right now. And our instances that had 400 plus databases in them.
Mm-hmm.
Doing we had a maintenance window where I don't remember what we were doing. I don't know if we were upgrading or just doing some patching or something, but it was the first time we'd ever had to fail those instances over. And we'd never had an experience of it taking longer than maybe 30 seconds or so.
So the 30 minutes was a surprise.
I think it clocked in at 55 minutes. the biggest one. But we'd gone long past our maintenance window, and it's this feeling of helplessness that I'm sure you both understand now, having dealt with that issue. Like, I literally cannot do anything to make this
Right.
faster or fix this. All we can do is sit here and wait. I'm
Right.
like,
it's like rolling back a transaction, right? You have some long process that's running, and then you decide, or someone decides, hey, the best thing I can do here is kill it. And then they kill it, and now it's in rollback, and like there is nothing you can do. And people panic and they pull the plug on the server and they think that's going to fix things, or they forcefully shut down SQL Server. And no, you just have to wait. You don't have any recourse. That's all you can do is wait.
Well, so our specific issue is related to the fact that we use Hekaton all over the place. And the number of databases we have in the AG, which requires, so many worker threads on recovery. But then also you have parallel redo for the Hekaton logs that also just essentially consume as many threads as they want to. We were just hitting thread starvation when we were trying to fail over, and the boxes would just sit there and pretty much do nothing and almost make no progress.
Yeah.
Eventually this is the story of why we use an undocumented trace flag on all of our instances.
Oh, I know. I think I know which one you're talking about. 3478.
It turns the parallel redo of the Hekaton logs off. And we test that whenever there's, speaking of testing before, that's one of the things that we try. Whenever they touch the Hekaton engine at all, or anything to do with database recovery, we'll pick a server in dev and we'll flip that off, and we'll see how it recovers. And so far, it still recovers like garbage, and we have to turn it back
And we
on.
very quickly switch it back on. Yeah.
Sorry, Kit.
I've been very leery of using in-memory OLTP. I have some PTSD from this, because in our last gig, someone decided to try it out on a production database, and you can't get rid of it. You can't turn it off. And you end up getting substantial weights involved with that, even if you have no tables on that file group.
Mm-hmm.
It's just an empty file group that's sitting there, but SQL Server still does stuff with it. And whether it's real or perceived, those weights existing there caused a lot of red herring. Oh my gosh, who's using in-memory OLTP on the server? And it turns out it's just an empty file group. But the fact that you can't get rid of it makes me still to this day very nervous about even thinking about turning it on. So.
I just want to clarify that someone wasn't me.
That wasn't
not throwing shade at me.
I was someone.
I'm not afraid to throw shade at Andy with like real words and not just the implication. So,
and it was actually it was the scenario that I think we've probably all done, where the person had intended to test it out in dev and accidentally connected to production, like they used the wrong window and ran a script in the wrong environment, and enabled it in production, and now there's no undo, no rollback. Now we're stuck with it on I forgot what it was, like a 10 terabyte database. So taking the data and copying it to a new database and doing an export and import, which is the documented how to get rid of it, is to create a new database and copy all your data there. Just wasn't going to happen, not in production for the 24/7 system.
Yeah, it's crazy to me that the number of people that have complained about this issue, that they haven't finished that part of the feature where you can actually turn it off and really turn it off. It's been
I wonder how many people
four major releases. They're not going to touch it in 2022, so it'll be 5 major releases, and you still can't turn it off.
I wonder how many people have asked, how do I turn off in-memory OLTP on Stack Overflow? We'll have to, maybe we can do a follow-up search.
We'll do some research. Yeah, I'll follow up.
It's right up. It's probably not quite as high as the number of people that are asking if they can start their database without processing rollback, and they're happy to have whatever database corruption comes with it.
Oh, I thought you were going to come out with a how to exit Vim joke there.
But so that's why if you get one of these Stack Overflow keyboards that my ring light is washing out, you can program it to do more than just Control-C, Control-V. You can program it so that one of the buttons exits Vim for you, and then you don't actually have to remember how to do it.
There you go.
I saw one of the best things ever on GitHub. Someone's got a Vim clutch. It's basically a guitar pedal, that when you press enters insert mode for Vim, and then when you let it off, it takes you back to normal mode. Well, yes, thank you very much.
Stream Deck could do that too, right? You could have a button on your Stream Deck.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and there's the new Stream Deck pedal, so you could use your Stream Deck pedal to do exactly what Andrew is describing.
Buy one of those.
We'll put a link in the show notes. Well, what about you, you two, Andrew, Anthony? Any nightmare situations you'd like to share?
Go on, Anthony. Off the top of my head, I haven't had anything too bad. I have had a corrupt failover instance. I can't remember the complete details of it. I just remember patching it and then failing back, and things went horribly wrong, and then having to try and uninstall the patch and restore in master. But it's been so long since I've touched a failover an FCI now that I'm just thankful for always on availability groups, to be fair. What about you, Anthony?
So the two that pop into my mind are in 2008. There were some case sensitivity issues in the host name. So the place I was working at, the systems folks used mixed case in the server names, which was great. And so I believe I actually couldn't roll a patch out, and then it was like super escalated inside of Microsoft, and eventually I got a resolution. Then the other one was I failed over an AG during, it was a very large database, this during an index build, so not necessarily patching, but just maintenance in general. And it was the highest severity I ever saw on a production system. It was like 23, 24. I'm like, oh great, there goes my weekend, right? But then I kind of like sorted through the mess, and I'm like, wait, the database is fine, CheckDB is okay. And I wound up reaching out to a fellow MVP friend at the time, and I was like, hey, what's going on here? Like, it's just a bug. But it was that feeling of like helplessness, and that when your stomach just drops, and you're like, oh wow. And those were the kind of the two biggest ones that pop into mind for me.
It's like, ooh, that shouldn't be.
Right.
That moment of helplessness when you fail over to the upgraded version and something goes wrong is exactly why I like to hold off on patching that last former primary node until like the next day, because if I'm doing that, if my maintenance window is from like 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. and I'm doing my AG failovers during that window, if something explodes overnight, I can hopefully just fail back to the server on the old CU without having to, flail, cry, drink myself to sleep, leave and come back and let Aaron fix it.
One of my before I became a full-time employee somewhere, one of my last consulting engagements, really kind of forward-thinking shop, DevOps, everything, but still had SQL Server as kind of the data tier, right? And maybe kind of this can help attack that problem, Andy. What they wanted to do was insert a new replica that was patched, right? And then fail over to it, and then insert a new replica again, and kind of walk through kind of like applying like, more DevOps kind of Kubernetes containers like principles, but to that traditional VM server model, because they were in Amazon and EC2. And so like just thinking out of the box, like would that even be attractive to folks if they had the automation to pull that off?
For most people, I think the size of data operation of making a new server is the problem. If you've got the technology in your infrastructure where you can do where you can clone a server by doing a SAN snapshot without having to do the like super sketch size of data operations. Yeah. So like those storage vendors that support SQL Server cloning well. There's one in particular that I can think of, Pure. I know some of the other vendors do it well as well, but that's the one that I know. You could clone all your disks, drop the CUs on those, and do it without it being a huge size of data operation. But otherwise, without that, those storage snapshots, and it's just not sustainable long term, because you're going to have each patching window or patching cycle becomes longer because your data is going to keep growing. And every time you spin up a new machine, it's going to take a little bit longer than last ones.
Yeah, because that's the guarantee, is that people don't delete data, right?
Right. And
Never.
at the last place, it was like 40 petabytes of data for production systems. So when you're talking 500 plus production servers, and you're doing this spin up additional nodes every time, that takes a long time to process all of that petabytes of restores.
Yeah, and to that, similar to that point, one of the things that I would work with customers with, especially around building run books to solve HADR problems, is actually having automation to inject a new node, right? Because that's something that needs to be a very smooth process for a
Right.
production box, not, right click, add replica. You can
Right.
do it that way, but I think that's just something that we need to have kind of smoothed out in our operational run books when we're doing these kind of things.
That's that process works fantastic for major upgrades, like spin up new nodes with the new version, fail over to them. It's beautiful for that, but I just couldn't imagine trying to do it, even if you're doing patching twice a year. Like the amount of churn to do all of that would be a lot.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we're gonna start wrapping it up here, but I do have a question. It's an oldie. We haven't asked this one in a while, but I'll ask you too. What's a feature that you would love to see in SQL? If you could pick any feature, doesn't matter how completely like complicated or whatever it is, just any feature that you could think of for SQL Server that could be released tomorrow, what would it be?
I want to see master and MSDB objects sync between AG nodes, because copying jobs and copying logins for the last, I don't know, and since I was using mirroring with 2008, like it has been the bane of my existence to copy those over reliably and not miss stuff or not cause disruption.
Thank you. 100% seconded here.
And login syncs, like everyone's got their own handwritten login sync or process, and that they always break eventually.
I was going to say that I would rather remove a feature
Oh,
than add one.
you haven't had this
Go
answer.
for it.
So there are probably a few. I would start with like merge and no lock. I would probably take those out of the product. But for a feature to be added, one I would love to see is the ability of SQL Server to reason about types better. I feel like a lot of times, like we have applications and ORMs and all these things that will send nvarchar strings all the time. And SQL Server doesn't know, like SQL Server has to do a lot of work to, perform implicit conversions or something like that. And it's even worse when the application forgets to put an n prefix on their strings, and it automatically converts it to a varchar. And then if you have an nvarchar in the table, of course you get this big problem, right? SQL Server it has to perform a scan, it can't perform a seek because it can't coalesce those two things. So what would be great if SQL Server saw a string coming in and said, hey, you forgot to put an n prefix on there, and put it there for you. That would be a fantastic feature.
Cool. All right. Well, I think at that we'll call it an episode. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks everyone for listening. Talk to you all next time.
Thank you.
Good chaps.
Yeah.